2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, and we're going to jump to Luke chapter 6. Our scripture verse that we're really focused on is Paul. In my NIV, it reads the vision and Paul's vision and his thorn, and it reads, to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong. And some of our discussions have focused on what that really means and how that should play out in the life of the professed believer. And I want us to jump over, if we can, to Luke chapter 6, verse 46. And this is one of Brother Steve's favorite verses, and I think it's one that helps to clarify the purpose and agenda for the professed Jesus believer. So this is in Luke, and in my NIV, actually it's subtitled The Wise and Foolish Builders. And I think that the first part of this is really that which is the most condemning in some regard. Why do you call me, by the way, this is Jesus speaking, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? I will show you what he is like who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He is like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. And these two really go very well together in that Paul is talking about the fact that because he's so blessed, there's so much that that potentially is a part of who he is, that he could easily become very egotistical, very conceited. That's probably already part of his nature, but this is only propping him up even more. And the thorn in his flesh that the Lord gives him is one so that if not each day, if not with each breath, it's very regularly he has to rely on the Lord to get him through, because this thing is so substantial that he's asked the Lord to take it away. And the Lord says, nope, I'm not going to do that, because you need to then rely on me so that you don't overly boast, that you don't overly become narcissistic, so that it's not about you. And then Paul's response is, okay, I get that. And I can get my head and my spirit around that to the point where I'm going to boast about my weaknesses, because in boasting in my weaknesses, Jesus is evident. Jesus is primary. And in that situation, then I will welcome hardships, insults, weaknesses. I will welcome that. And we've talked over the past several weeks that that's really not the standard of, if not Westerners, if not humans, certainly not Americans. So let me pause there for a second before I jump into our last 4 questions before we get into some more different meat and potatoes. Any comments, any thoughts about 2 Corinthians 12, about Luke chapter 6? Am I reading this incorrectly? Does it not make sense? Does Paul mean something absolutely different? Am I misinterpreting this?
I don't think you're misinterpreting it.
Well, thank you for that succinct response. If you can tell, I'm operating today in the mindset of a really neat 1960s song, which is "Silence is Golden." I'm not going to rush anything today. So if there's some silence and it feels like it's uncomfortable, not feeling uncomfortable on my end. Sometimes silence helps people to think a little bit more, internalize, and then consider how to apply. So I'm going with that particular adage today. Silence is golden. Not feeling uncomfortable about it at all. So let me pose 2 questions that I posed a couple of weeks ago, but then let me follow it up with a key question, very short question that lends itself to the Jesus encounter. So here are the two questions that I'm posing to you and I'd like you to respond to. Number one, do you grumble and complain? And number two, do you manage your anger? Do you grumble and complain, or grumble or complain? And secondly, do you manage your anger? So let me follow that up with a key question, because this question also lends itself to Bruce answering that Jesus encounter question. As you consider the questions that were just posed, I want you, if you're comfortable responding, I'd like you to respond with also this, the answer to this question. Why?
Okay. So sometimes I grumble and complain. Sometimes I manage my anger well. Sometimes I don't. Why? Part of it is sometimes you just need to voice it and have someone either confirm or maybe be the calmer of your complaint. Sometimes you just need to kind of voice what you're feeling and have that out. And sometimes it's nice to have a sounding board for someone to come back and say this is valid, or this is overreacting, or let it go, or what. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I think that that's a regular reality. I also might think that, no, that one would get me in a lot of trouble. People are built differently, and so that may be one of the presentations that is built into how they operate during the course of the day, that there's grumbling or complaining that's allowed, and there's, in some ways, a response that's expected to quell or to react.
I've just had a thought occur to me, and I think when we covered this question before, I believe honesty, said I hardly ever do. But I see an M on my screen that indicates Michaela is here, and she might have a different insight into that, because we ride on the road a lot together, going from one end of town to the other. And I got to thinking about that, and your why question is what made it happen. Okay, why Broad Street? Why the interstate? You know, and people drive dumb. You know, and they're in the far left lane, and there's just enough space between the two cars in the middle lane that they can slide over and then take the exit. I'm like, and again, maybe Michaela can chime in here, but it's like, okay, you could do it that way, is sometimes the thing I say. We had a truck come past us the other day, and I was thankful he left the right front quarter panel, because he came mighty close because he was in a hurry. And I will comment on, well, I guess, and we will actually in the truck go, well, you know, maybe his wife's having a baby, or there's an emergency, or we will actually do a little bit of giving of the benefit of the doubt, but sometimes people just drive dumb. And so the grumbling, complaining that I will do is oftentimes associated with the dumb stuff people do when they're behind the wheel. Managing anger, I've already talked about that at length. I'm not going to talk about that anymore, except I just don't manage it anymore. God has done some amazing things there. But yeah, I have a confession. Grumbling and complaining happens a lot of the time when I see other people do dumb stuff.
Thank you for that, Brother Gene.
I would have to go with Sherry, because And of course, my husband's on the line, and so is Nathan. So I got to be careful how I say this. But they have told me that I am kind of a passive aggressive person, and 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 yeah. And sometimes I will complain, but I'll complain in a way that they'll be like, "Will you just tell me what you want me to do?" Thanks, Steve. Will you just tell me what you want me to do? As opposed to complaining about something like, okay, apparently I got to do this because nobody else will do it in the house. That's me. Right? And Steve and Nathan will corroborate that, so they know that I am not. But I mean, people will know because thanks, Nathan, because as everybody knows, I do wear my feelings on my sleeve, whether they are happy, sad, or just plain annoyed or angry. So it's people know how I'm feeling. But sometimes I grumble and complain. Sometimes I do it more than I probably should. Manage my anger depends on the situation. And why am I not? That's really a good question because I would like to be able to not be a complainer or a grumbler or be able to not be angry, but sometimes it just happens, especially on the interstate with crazy people. So that's my 2 cents worth.
You guys know I'm famous for my Broad Street tirades, so I don't need to go there. Preston, I actually asked myself this question yesterday. We had a bunch of people over to the house yesterday afternoon for fellowship. And so I was running around yesterday morning doing things, and I went to Target, which I don't go often. I went to Target not once, but twice yesterday. And I found myself, as I walked out the second time, being exasperated because I had a cart, which made it all the more irritating. But I just, by the time I got to my car, I was just almost screaming because it just seemed like I think everybody but me must have been given a complimentary joint or something coming in the door because they just were walking around in a daze. And but I got to the car and I asked myself, Larry, so what is wrong with you? Because everybody's pushing your buttons today. And the thing that came to my mind, because I grouse quite a bit. I grouse probably in 2 categories. One is that. And then the other is in areas that I perceive as injustices. I'll put it under that category. And that's most of the time to Christine. It's just me grousing her, but I realize that sometimes I treat her more like a trash can than my wife, and that's not good. But as I got in my car yesterday after my second trip into Target, and I'm sorry, it's going to kind of be a churchy answer, but I had to ask the Lord to forgive me because I realized that to a large extent, yes, they were doing dumb things, but what motivated was they were inconveniencing me. And that's not where I needed to be, quite frankly. And so I had to do a quick checkup there as to what my motivations were behind that. So my righteous anger maybe wasn't as much righteous as it was just anger. So that being said, I feel like my anger is much more in check than it used to be. For some of the reasons already stated.
Well, you know what, Bruce, I appreciate that because when he first asked the question, why, a kind of a pat answer that came to my mind was, it's all about us.
Yeah.
It inconveniences us. It threatens us. It in some way or another, it is going against what I think is right for me. Now I'm going to give a disclaimer here because of the way I drive back to the interstate, back to Broad Street, because of the way I drive, I'm not trying to bob and weave and go past people and all that kind of thing. I used to be able to do that. I used to do that all the time because, as a matter of fact, I had a kid is there anybody in this group? I don't think there is that knows the name Jeff Locklear. Michaela might know the name, but I don't know that she's even met him. Anyway, He and I were in the car together. I was driving, and we're on Parham Road. You'll know the intersection. Parham Road, approaching Hungry Spring, just right at the turn lane to turn left. And I'm in my '69 Camaro back in the day, and I squeaked through the lane that was there and the median and got into the turn lane. Jeff, in simultaneous attitude, said, "Oh, that scared me. Oh, could you do that again?" Kind of thing. So I had that capability and that history. The point I'm trying to make is, because I don't drive like that anymore, I'm driving the speed limit, and people are passing me. I'm not trying to jockey for position, all that kind of thing, because I've come to the conclusion it's transportation. It's not the Indianapolis 500. There is no winning except getting to the other side of town for us, typically, safely. So I don't drive with that type A, competitiveness. We're going to talk about my lack of competitiveness in the message today, but I don't have that anymore. So when I see people do dumb stuff, it's not on driving, that is. It's not so much about me, because I don't think it's inconvenienced me. I don't think it's hurt me. It's just like, that ain't so smart, I'm going to give it that disclaimer. But overall, when we do grumble and complain, for the most part, it's because something has gone against what we think is appropriate for us. And if that sounds selfish, it's because it is. And that's what our issue is.
So I very much appreciate how the discussion is flowing now, because sometimes when we do this and we ask really why, and people are sincere or genuine in answering why, we discover what the underbelly is. And a lot of times the underbelly is me. It's inconveniencing me. It doesn't go my way. It's upsetting my flow. I remember, well, that's not even I remember. I appreciate Brother Bruce saying, I think everybody got a free joint at the Target today, because they were just all over the place. Well, look, folks, one of our mantras, one of our church people mantras, right, is lost people act like lost people, right? So if we know that a majority of folks, if they're not lost, they're acting as practical or functional atheists, right? Then they're going to be getting in the way. They're going to be getting in the way of what we think is a positive and effective flow, sometimes simply because they're just going to do stupid. And when we go back to the Jesus encounter, the as we go may have to change in our mindset. The as we're going may need to change. So, for instance, I know that Jean needs to get Michaela to her martial arts. But as long as he gets there safely, and if he's paying for it and he gets there at whatever time that ultimately may be effective for Michaela, or he and Michaela talk about it, they deal with the impediments that they deal with in order to get there, recognizing that we're in a world that we say is fallen and is full of lost people acting like lost people. So that means that things take a different time for us, because we're preparing for us differently because of the world we're in and the people with whom we encounter. And in the communication biz, it's funny listening to Sarah talk about and Sherry talk about needing to voice aloud this thing, and Sarah kind of jokingly talking about having the label passive aggressive. In the communication business, we actually have names for a couple of those things. When you kind of grumble and complain, or you talk to someone else, we call that cross dialogue, because you're looking to interact with someone else, interface with someone else, and connect. When you do it yourself, and you guys know this one, I'll give you an example in a second. We call that side dialogue, right? So when you walk into the kitchen and everyone's had breakfast and all of the dishes are in the sink and they're not rinsed or in the dishwasher, and you go, well, I guess these dishes are going to clean themselves. It's remarkable how dishes just sometimes leave the sink and get into the place where they should be, all nice and clean. Well, there may be other people there, but you're not addressing what you have to say to other people. Sarah may say that's a passive aggressive. In the communication biz, we call that side dialogue or side talk, because you actually say that to yourself, but you intend for other people not only to hear it, but to respond to it.
So it's not what I say. Did I say that out loud? It's more like I meant to say it out loud.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we do that in our cars.
See, that's the point when Nathan and I come in and sort of tweak Sarah a little bit and just stare at the dishes, because we're like, we want to see when these dishes start cleaning themselves.
Pardon me for a second while I go smack my husband.
It's to say that this condition that we're discussing is such a reality that it's made its way psychologically into a discourse. It's a feature that's addressed in helping people to be able to work through their, air quotes, demons. So maybe one of the remedies for that is first off, is 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. That's the first remedy. Maybe a secondary remedy is to consider where you're going and to consider with whom you're potentially going to interact. And then prepare yourself to go. It's not going to go the way I'd like it to go. Especially, and I see where Bruce is talking about, if you got to go to Target twice, and folks, you got to figure out, someday maybe we'll have a field trip to where Bruce is. He lives up on the mountain, middle of the mountain. You got to come down. That takes you a longer time than you think, and then you got to go into kind of traffic to deal with where Target is. And the Target traffic is a little bit different than our Target traffic because there's only one Target. So to go there not only once, which I hate on the mainland, but to go there twice. You've got to be, and look, let's go church on this. You got to be prayed up to deal with that bad boy. Because stupid is
pull your hair out. It makes you pull your hair out.
You got to add one more item to that too. Most of them are on vacation.
So is Target the tourist trap then for you guys?
Costco.
Oh, Costco.
Costco, right? That is the most mainland place on our island.
But it's to say, folks, there's a predictability to our days and the as we goes, especially if we're not changing our schedule, if we're not changing our activities. And so getting your head around anticipating, let's call it what it is, stupid, may help our mindsets in terms of being able to get out of our own way and not necessarily grumble or complain, or not to get angry the same way perhaps that we're either typically doing or that even we used to.
I like what you're saying there. And it's I guess it's somewhat cliched, but the idea that we should enjoy the journey as much as the destination is really what I hear you saying there. Maybe you're the only one that'll appreciate this. I shared with Preston the other night, I've been binging the old lawyer show, The Practice. And the last season of that is where we get introduced to a character by James Spader, who had gone on to be in Boston Legal for a number of years, named Alan Short. And I was watching an episode of that the other day, and something about his character, and he's definitely not a Christian, but something about his character really speaks to me, because he's a person that when he engages and interacts with somebody, when he engages with somebody, he sees the person. and he looks for value in that person. Now, sometimes it's value to him, but nonetheless, he sees the person, he analyzes the person, and he looks for something in that person of worth. And certainly he's a TV character. He's written, unlike us. But I was just thinking to myself the other day as I watched one of those episodes, I thought, I need to be more like that. Every interaction I have with somebody, I need to be looking for their worth. Not for me, but just in general. Find something to connect with them on. And that was a real challenge to me, I thought. So maybe that's why I've been binging the show, so I could get to that point and be challenged in that way. But that's all part of that, enjoying the journey, as opposed to you're just a prop that's in the way to get me to where I really need to go. So I appreciate you saying it that way, because just leave 10 minutes early and it all gets a lot less stressful. Lots of times.
Thank you for weighing in there, Bruce. I can tell you that the best thing, if this is going to sound like it's kind of an oxymoron of sorts, the best thing about COVID from my family is it's freed us up in order to have that kind of mindset, so that the journey is more important in many ways than just the destination. Destination is still important, but you guys remember the song from the 70s, Stopping and Smelling the Roses Along the Way? Right? Corny pop song. That's a reality. And it's the kind of thing that if you consider that there are people in hospital rooms, there are people that have terminal diagnoses who wish that they had an opportunity to do a portion of their life again, to do exactly what Bruce has kind of described. To not just get through things, to get to the next, but to take the time during the walk, take the time during the biking, take the time during the driving to appreciate the getting there as well as the arrival. And I don't know that we do that. Look, I don't know that Americans do that. I don't know that Westerners do it. I do know that Europeans do this way, 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 way better. Europeans do this way better than Americans. My wife and I regularly talk about, and maybe this is something that won't work for everybody, but it's something to consider. If you ever watch Europeans have a meal, it's a very different situation than Americans having a meal. By the way, that was part of why we started meeting and worshiping the way that we did, whether in Jean's house or in our house, and then having food afterwards. Because that's what Europeans do regularly when they eat. In fact, sometimes they close down in the Iberian Peninsula, or typically Latin American or Latin countries. They close down in part so people get a chance to enjoy the fraternization, enjoy finding people in the course of perhaps dining or eating together. So it's not just an eating because we have to eat and let's get done. It's an encounter that may last interminably. And so sometimes we as Americans are very fast-paced. We want things to get done. And look, you're talking to a transplanted New Englander. So as a New Englander, we speak fast, we transfer information very fast, we assimilate information very quickly. Moving to the South was a huge, huge piece of weirdness for us when we first did it, because I literally would have my CEO or my vice president saying, excuse me, you need to slow down in meetings because people don't understand what you're saying. And I'm not saying that to be insulting. I'm saying that to say that I understand when I read Paul, how it is at this point in time he's beginning to say, in my weakness, Jesus gets to shine, and I'm okay with that. I'm not telling you I'm okay with that, but I'm telling you that there's a progression that should happen as we mature with the Lord, not in a churchified sense, but that takes into account the things that Jean said about traffic, the thing that Sarah said about her cross and side talk, the thing that Bruce sort of said about people kind of being annoying because they're perpetually getting stoned or acting like they've got a high going on that I don't have. And putting that into the hopper and recognizing, okay, that's the world I'm in. So And like Bruce said, I need to find, it's not the activity that's the most important, it's the people along the way toward the activity. And those folks have value and merit, and I need to figure out what that is, if I'm going to have the ability to have a Jesus encounter with them. Even if it's simply to ask them, do you know Jesus? So let me pause there. Thoughts about that? Just a bunch of schlock that just came out of me.
Well, I think you've actually shared a whole bunch of really important things. First off, I appreciate the picture you gave of the transplantedness of coming from New England down to slow Southern drawl people like us, and how they responded to your rapidly speaking in code. I can't imagine what that would have been like. You already speak in code on top of that, but to do it quickly, that's a picture that amazing. I appreciate Bruce's comment about value because, boy, he is surrounded by people that are in no hurry to go anywhere because they're on vacation, they're on holiday, and they're, what's the rush? But we are typically, as Americans, I'm going to use a word that may not seem like it fits here, but I think it does. Missional. When he goes to the Target, he's got a job he's trying to get accomplished. He's got something he's trying to get done. And that brings us back to the Samaritan. And by the way, I think that's an account rather than a parable. And I appreciate the way you phrase that because, again, typically when it's a parable, it's a certain man in a certain country, blah, blah, blah. Here we've got a very ethnic description of the guy who stops. We've got a description of the people who stopped or went by on the other side. And I believe, this is me, I believe that this is something that would have been in the Jerusalem news that day, of something that happened and how it played out. But the point I'm trying to make is the Samaritan was also missional. He had something he had to get done, but he set that aside to, as Bruce put it, to see the value in the person and to value them enough to set aside his own mission to do something about that person who is in need. And I think we need to, that's a huge mentality change for me because I am tasked, get it done kind of thing. I do have, again, because we try to, like Michaela talks about, early is on time is late, late is left. We try to allow the time for things that might delay us. But I think maybe we need to work toward, and consequently, because we allow time, we're leisurely in driving the speed limit when we're going someplace. But maybe we need to allow a little more time to allow for opportunities to see the value in the people that we're encountering on the journey and doing something about it. I appreciate that.
There's more to this discussion than just allowing the people factor. But that's kind of where we are in talking about our grumbling and complaining and managing our anger, because a lot of times there are two things that trigger our anger and our frustration that leads us to grumble and complain. And one of those is circumstances, but probably more importantly, it's people. Right? And my wife and I have had this interesting fun debate over the time that we've known, since I've been dating her. And one of the things that she finds absolutely, well, I don't think it's frustrating at this point, and she might find it hilarious or kind of idiotic. I can go into a convenience store and spend hours there. And sometimes I don't have anything to do. I don't really need to buy. I don't need anything. I don't need to buy anything. But I'll walk around the store looking at stuff and meeting people. And so when I was first dating Ellen, she would joke that I would leave her home as we were dating, and I would go to with the purpose of getting a liverwurst sandwich. Sorry about that for those of you who don't like liverwurst. But there was a Wawa probably about less than a mile down the street from her house, and and the mission to get the liverwurst sandwich would be about a 2.5 hour mission trip, and so she would regularly kind of give me a hard time about how long it took me to get the liverwurst sandwich. And now, so we've been together for a whole bunch of years now. So she knows that I'm not necessarily out courting anybody. She knows that if I'm at the Wawa or if I'm at the Sheetz, wow, or if you're in Texas, there's a place called Cubby's. If Chris, you know Cubby's, don't you, in Texas?
It's called
man.
Buc-ee's.
Pardon me, honey?
Buc-ee's.
Oh, Buc-ee's. Yeah. Okay. I transposed the letters. So you know Buc-ee's, Chris, right? All right. So Buc-ee's is even worse than, say, 7-Eleven, Sheetz, and all of those put together, because Buc-ee's is a whole world. And so my wife is patient if she doesn't get out of the car. It's going to be like Bruce says, I'm going to be waltzing around. I'm going to be meeting with folks. I'm going to ask them questions. And so the stop at the convenience store is a lot longer than if I needed to go to the convenience store or if I need to get gas. And we build that into, well, my wife kind of allows us to build that into our lives so that the missional aspect that Gene talks about is one that's less, got to get it done, and it's more, could you just let's get going?
Having eaten with you a few times, I've learned to not just kind of grind inside when the waitress takes the menus and you say, can I keep mine? Because we just know that means that somehow there's going to be an extension to the meal as time goes on. But I appreciate that. You know, there's a little saying out here. You don't hear it a lot, but you hear it every so often. It's this, and it's kind of pigeony sounding. Try wait. And you'll hear it from somebody when somebody is just trying to push forward, right? They're like, hey, brah, try wait. And that's kind of the context that you see it in. But one of the things that we have here that really kind of speaks to all of this is another phrase we have is it's called talk story. When
Use that pretty often.
Yeah, and when you go almost anywhere, I mean, unless it's really very transactional, right? And even then, it can happen. There's a sense that before you do business, you should talk story. And I remember it was brought home to me one time, very, 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 in a very real way. I have a friend here named Craig, who's a mortgage lender guy. He actually manages one of the credit unions in town. I mean, runs it. And Craig's a good Catholic friend of mine. He's actually a Catholic deacon. I went to his ordination, which was an entirely different thing. But I remember I went in to sit down with Craig to talk to him about lending and some different things one day. And I had a whole list of things I wanted to talk to him about. We spent a half hour talking story about family and church and all kinds of different things before we ever got around to business. And that was important to Craig. And I find that to be the case here. I mean, you literally could call the power company to get the power turned on and need to talk story with that person who's a total stranger before you get to the, hey, I need to get the power turned on. And so I really appreciate that part of this culture because it puts you in that mode where we need to do the personal stuff before we do the business stuff. And it does slow you down. And I'm learning how to do that better. And people back in Virginia, when you do that, will look at you a little weird sometimes. I will say that. But yeah, I think that's part of that dynamic you're talking about there, Preston.
Yeah, folks, I'm not sharing some of this with you to say that I or we've arrived, but it's to help you understand that there's a progression and a maturity of sorts, and it's the rationale how uh, Jerry, Sherry, and I can go to the saloon, can go to the nightclub, and meet people. We talk about it this way in a way that may be offsetting, off-putting for church people. We go when we do karaoke, but if you've ever really gone with us, one of the things that you'll see is the talk story aspect is really what we have happened. That people typically, when they're going to these bars, et cetera, they're looking to eliminate or erase or minimize in part some yuck that's happening in their lives, especially if they're going to overly indulge. And you might be surprised, and it's not just in saloons, it's not just in bars, it's not just in nightclubs, it's in Target too. There are folks who would like to unload on and with you as to the burdens of their lives. And I say that to you because if you can condition yourself to being able to take the time to do that, then we might be able to get our heads around what it is that Paul's talking about in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, is recognizing that we really, look, we say this, and I don't know that we always really own it, that we suck. Just as humans, we blow it regularly. We just do. And then allowing the Jesus to shine through you in spite of the fact that you suck. See, then what that does is it allows you to tamper down you when you start to rise to the top and go, I'm annoyed, I'm bothered, I'm bugged by this, and just allow it to happen. And then you respond because in part, and then some of this sounds churchified, but it's real. Some of this you're going, Holy Spirit, show me an opening. Holy Spirit, show me what to say. No, help me to know what to do next. And when you're focused that way, surprisingly, if that's your prayer, because that's your ask not, you have not because you ask not. If you ask the Lord for wisdom in a situation like that, He will give it to you. But that's probably not the place we go, because what we're actually praying is, Calgon, take me away. This person is overbearing. I don't like the way their breath smells. They haven't showered. This is bothersome. I want out. And being able to put yourself in a position of recognizing right now, I have no control of the situation. Jesus, take the wheel. Remember our earlier discussions, right? Okay. So if we don't allow Jesus to take the wheel all the time, this is a Jesus take the wheel moment. When it's out of our control. Which we, in our earlier part of this discussion, we talked about. We don't like being out of control. Especially when I'm missional, when I'm about getting it done, it's my agenda, and my agenda is the most important thing. Do not put a monkey wrench in that, because I'm not happy about that. So I like when Bruce talks about his pacing in Hawaii, because folks, look, Hawaiians are Americans, but Hawaiians have a very different idea about doing stuff. And one of the things we've learned is, if you make an appointment with a Hawaiian repair person to be there at 8 o'clock, if they show up, it's a good day. That's a very different mindset than from the mainland. And folks, we're not even moving away from America, because in South America, it's even weirder than that. So I'm throwing out some things to help us to think that as Americans, as Westerners, I know we rule and we own the world, and we have for about 200-300 years now, but that doesn't mean that we have all components right and that we do it well. Brother Gene, go ahead.
Well, I actually had hit unmute accidentally, but there have been a couple of things that have crawled through my brain as we've been talking about this. Lack of control sounds like a me thing. I just want to kind of throw that out there. And your whole, Michaela can back me up on this. At the dinner table just last night, we were actually talking about the very thing you mentioned with regard to the difference between how we Americans missionally eat to get the task done, and even digestion. Kathy put her stuff in there as far as the digestive system and the time it takes, and blah blah blah, and the Europeans. And as you were talking about it just today, all of a sudden something clicked. I'm going to I dropped a name earlier. I'm going to drop another one for you. This is someone you may or may not know. Steve Nelson. Anybody know Steve Nelson? Nobody knows Steve Nelson. Steve is from Boise, Idaho, potato country. He was pastor in Queens, New York, when I was up there helping build a church. And Steve married into a Greek family. You with me so far? Now, well, what's that?
Bruce did the same thing.
Yeah, only I think that uh, Steve's wife was closer to the immigrating part of the family. If this would have been more like, I think, a Verlini, rather, that generation, as far as where Steve was. Anyway, Olga's parents both came here from Greece, and while we don't think about it, Greece is European. Okay. And one of Steve's big complaints, it was just infuriating to him from potato country. Every time they sat down to eat, it was cold. And the reason I think it was, now that I'm thinking about it, is because it was more of a social event rather than let's get it while it's hot kind of mentality. And so we've been talking about this in our house. I think we may need to slow down and I tell you what, I'm fascinated by Bruce's comments with regard to the mentality there in Hawaii, because the life story thing. I like that, because that, again, to use his words, is basically applying a value to the individual. I care about you as a person, what you're going through, and maybe we need to, as Christians, be more attuned to that and find out what's going on with people. We used to do that all the time, as far as we just say it. I'll put it that way. The person who waits on you at the restaurant, find out about them. I don't do that. I'm not by any way, shape, or form a master of that, but I remember we used to talk about that. Find out what's going on with those people. And I'm not very quick about doing that. I may have developed an understanding of their background over time, more slowly. But I think it's important. Find out. I mean, how many times have we said it? When you're at the restaurant and the waiter or waitress comes up to you, we're about to pray. Is there something we can pray for you about? That's kind of in your face. That's a little more extroverted than I can be, but I don't think it's a bad thing. So, but yeah, find out something about them. Let's care about people. And by the way, if we have that mentality, we may appear to be, and I'm going to use a word that's misused a lot, we may appear to be more mystical to the non-believing world if we do that, because they're not attuned to that. They're not attuned to doing it. Like you said, the lost are going to act like the lost. They're going to be missional in a completely different way. And by the way, your tourist there at Target, Bruce, I would be, because I'm ahead of schedule and not really on a schedule necessarily. I would be the one wandering around, let's take our time, let's look at this, look at that. And I would be in your way. So I'll apologize ahead of time for that.
Well, I have to disagree with you on one thing you said, because maybe you're not that direct now, but you have been, because I've stood on front porches with you when we've knocked on doors, and you've been very direct about where they're going to spend an eternity, to the point that I've had to step back from the door a few times. So I know you have that in you, if you're in the right. And again, maybe that's because that was your mission at that moment, as opposed to sitting down in front of a meal. But you have it in you. You just got to turn it on. And I'm not saying that just for you. All of us need to be that way, as Preston started this whole conversation out. It does become situational, I think, often, as to when our, for lack of a better word, boldness comes front and center.
Well, and you know what? I appreciate that, Bruce, because that's true. I will agree there, but it is missional. It is a missional, I'm going out door to door for the purposes of doing that, rather than having the as you go campaign mentality. I'm gonna go have dinner at Denny's, and as I go, I'm also going to be entering the battle. Well, that's going to mess up my pancakes. But we need to have a higher priority than the pancakes, and I'm still working on that. The as you go part. When you're going door to door, you're interrupting their day. You've got nothing else to do except continue to knock on doors. It is more missional. But when it's my eggs and pancakes that got to be coming, and I need to divert from that to the campaign, I'm selfish in that regard. I'll say that. Again, different mission. The mission is get fed, and maybe I get they're hungry, and so I'm too grumpy because I'm hungry. Let's get this done, and then maybe I can be a person again. It's kind of like that old Snickers commercial. If you haven't got your food, you're not yourself. So anyway, thank you for that, Bruce. Appreciate the reminder.
Folks, that's why we're having the discussion, to in some ways recognize that we're perhaps a long ways off from where Paul's describing himself in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. We're a long ways off from, in many ways, denying ourselves that biblical phrase and allowing Jesus to reign, because we're still so focused, we're so self-focused. And I really appreciate Brother Bruce being able to applaud Gene, to say, Gene, you do have the boldness, and then Gene responding, yep, because the boldness was the mission. But folks, we're missing the as you go, which is what Brother Gene just presented, and then we're missing the element in Luke 6. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, if you don't do what I told you to do? And what he told us to do was not to go soul win. He said, as you go. As you go. So one of the things I've been able to appreciate a lot about my wife, especially in this post-COVID time, is I've been able to work remotely for a lot of years. But my wife just actually, because of COVID, they removed her from the office, and then she got to manage squads of people remotely because COVID was going to blow the office up and blow people up and all sorts of stuff. By the way, you've seen our chief administrator has now had it, I think, 3 times. So had we addressed, I won't make that statement. You all can read the newspaper and figure that out. Anyway, it's not killing all of society. But having said that, I've been able to overhear my wife operating with her teams in this post-COVID pandemic environment. And frequently, one of the things that will happen in exchanges during work is that sometimes her directors or her peers, if not the folks that are her direct reports, will say something like, well, I need to apologize to Ellen because, and now they're going to make a statement about religion or about church or about something of the sort. And here's why I say that. Because in the most challenging environment that Americans find, which is separation of work and Jesus, my wife has managed that all of the folks, for the most part, that work with her know that she's a Jesus believer. And so when they're going to preface a conversation about church, religion, faith, etc., they single her out to say, well, my apologies to, or excuse me to Ellen, because I was just listening a couple of weeks back, and one of her directors said, I was so flummoxed with a work situation that I guess I cussed to the point where I needed to go to church and ask for forgiveness. So they presented in this directorship meeting that, oh, my apologies to Ellen, that I got to the point where I needed to go this and where I needed to explode this way, and I needed to then go to church and ask for forgiveness. That's an as you go kind of situation, folks, because you know my wife. She doesn't certainly seem to be as loudmouthed as her husband. However, her impact and her import in the as you go territory is exactly what we're discussing today. Is that the people in her work environment, not only is she the go-to person for apologies, she's the go-to person when people say, I'm having this going on in my life. Can you pray with or for me? That's as you go. Make sense? She's going to work to get the work done that provides our paychecks. That's the mission. But the as you go is in her opportunities to be able to share Jesus. She's found a way to do that hasn't gotten her called into HR. And she's been there certainly less than Sarah's 30 years. But she's been there about 20 years and has managed to do that. So, the as you go is almost more important than what Bruce and Jean had as an interaction with the missional soul winning ideal. Because the soul winning ideal is not one where you talk story. It's you got the job to ask the person about their eternity, and then depending on the answer they give and how long you have to get to the next house, you get to step into the next house potentially. Sometimes when you're at the saloon, sometimes when you're at the job, sometimes when you're at the convenience store, you may have to connect with that person several times to be able to get an opportunity to as you go.
And that's the speed I'm talking about. I'm not talking about and again I'll go to Denny's because that's a familiar place for us. IHOP, whatever comes to mind for you is best. Leaving the bacon, eggs, and pancakes on the table and go act like you've knocked on their door and say, if you were to die today, do you know for sure you go to heaven? And begin to engage that discussion while the food gets cold and the folks sitting at the table get frustrated, and you're in basically engaged in the same way, like literally in the same way when you knocked on that door, you did that to them. You don't know what they were doing. They may have been having dinner. They may have been engaging in something illegal or immoral, or you may have interrupted their porn fest or their binging, or of course back in the day they weren't binging when Bruce and I went door to door because that sort of capability wasn't around. But the point I'm making is you interrupt their day for them off the wall question, and then all of a sudden you're missional about that. They're not necessarily going to be on board with that. But if you develop a relationship with a wait staff, and matter of fact, we've had this happen. Where have you guys been? Or we've had them actually come in and say, "Oh, yeah, you guys sit over here. I recognize you." Kind of mentality, not necessarily those words. And the usual. Matter of fact, I went to the Burger King the other day. One I used to go to when I worked out toward Preston's place, and the lady that typically would wait on me, I was there scurrying about with a mask on, and we got to chat just a little bit. Again, I've got a little bit of a relationship with Cece. She used to be in the back. She's up in the front, and I asked her about a former coworker. So we're able to engage there. But when it comes to the as you go part, confessing again, I'm a little slower about that rather than the in your face, kind of like we used to do knocking on doors. And so I'm still working on mastering that. I appreciate your leisureness, Preston, that you can go to the 7-Eleven, convenience store, whatever, and just wander around and not even need anything, looking for an opportunity to talk to people. I appreciate that. You've got a leisureness about you that I admire.
It's the liverwurst in me. So
Okay.
especially based on what you,
Is that like I got the music in me?
it is.
Okay.
I just would tell you, don't create a song over it because it's probably not going to be a sell. This is the question that I wanted to ask when the question is posed about Jesus encounters, and if your answer is I have none, then my question has to be toward you, why or why not? And here's why. Let me explain why, and then I'm going to jump to our next two questions, unless you folks have comments, etc. Yeah, it does sound like a Weird Al song, Sarah. Shut up, you face. I know a lot of you, I know for a fact a lot of you spend time, if you don't go to during the course of the week, a restaurant. I know some of you eat out 2 to 3 times a week. Some of you go to the gym. Some of you go get gas, and you're not in New Jersey, so you don't have the person coming out and taking care of your gas, so you have to go into the convenience store. Some of you go to convenience stores, and all of you, for the most part, unless you're maybe retired or doing other things the way maybe Chris does, all of you are going to work. So when the question's posed about as you go, which is what we've just discussed, and Jesus encounters, and the exchanges just happen the way that you've heard Brother Gene, Brother Bruce talk, the reason for you, or you've got to ask yourself the question, why was there not a Jesus encounter? And I shouldn't be asking you the question. Because I think Luke 6 again says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you don't do what I tell you to do? And what he told us to do is, as you go, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then to teach them to do all that I commanded. So why do you say he's your Lord if you're not doing what it is he said to do? So the last two questions to consider are these two. And these are questions, if you have an answer to those, please. And then the why. Actually, I won't ask the last question yet. Do you have a thick skin? Do you have a thick skin?
I think it's thicker than it used to be, right?
Sure.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
because, but I do tend to probably not have a thick skin, right? Things
Yes.
bother me. Things bother me.
Yes.
But
I got into trouble with you with that several years back.
well, we had a conversation about it and it was all good, right?
Yes.
So we had a conversation and all was right with the world. But I think experiences help you get that thicker skin and not take things so personally. I will tell you, with my job as a project manager, when things don't go right, I do take it personally, right? Even though I shouldn't. And even my manager says, you shouldn't take it personally because it's not something that you did or didn't do. A lot of times it's how things fell. It's problems that came in at the last minute. It's whatever the case may be. But so, I'd like to think it's getting thicker. It's probably not thick enough because things still do bug me.
Appreciate that mightily. Anybody else? How's your skin thickness?
I think I have to agree with Sarah. It's a lot thicker than it used to be. And so, but there are times still when things can really bother me, and I take things probably to heart more than I should. But definitely over the years, I have grown a thicker skin. Things don't quite faze me in the way that they would have in the past. Still a work in
Geez.
progress.
I would, excuse me, I would tend to think it's probably situational. When it's something that is an attack on us or an affront to us, we may be a little thinner skinned and react to it. We talked about that earlier. The highway, driving on the roadway. Other things that you just like, doesn't bother me, or it's not of my world. Those things you can allow to roll off your shoulders without any problems. But it gets back to the, does it directly affect me?
But sometimes we may not realize it doesn't directly impact us, but we think it does. Like we think that whatever it is something, it's a slight against us when it really wasn't. But it was because and to take it personally because our skin is not so thick. So, but I do agree a lot with you, Chris, that a lot of times it is situational because if you know it's not against you, it's not as bad, right? But when you know it is or aren't quite sure, you sometimes take it personally. My family will tell me I take things personally. I don't know how to take jokes very well, which is very true.
I think sometimes, and I agree with Chris's assessment with regard to situationalism, but I think there's also a different sort of thing, and we've talked about this before, but now we're going to change it a little bit. I think that there's a different kind of, and to use your term, Preston, skin thickness in the South than what you have in the North. So there's kind of a locality definition. When I was in New York, I grew a thicker skin because it was just a completely different environment, different culture. And when I came back down here, all of a sudden, my approach to things was not acceptable. I got called out because I had basically assumed the New York way of doing things, and when I came down here, that was not acceptable. So I got into trouble. Can't believe he said that. Literally, they would say, "I can't believe he said that." So I think there's a locality situation there as well. You probably came down to Virginia from Connecticut with a thicker skin than what you may have now. I also, as for okay, you kept it. All right. And project manager, you reminded me of something, Sarah. I worked for a guy when I was contracting at Capital One in the marketing analysis department. His name is Milton Lampkin. He had this mantra, this philosophy. He was the leader, project manager, and if everything went well, his take was it was the team's credit. But if anything went awry, he took the blame for it. And I understand that. And to me, I think that's good leadership. That's taking responsibility. But we have to kind of draw the line that it's the professional versus the personal. And I think that's kind of hard to do, particularly for us guys. Us guys tend to take ownership of our profession in such a way that we are. It was like the old miscongeniality line. We are the job. This is who we are. We identify so closely with our vocation that it becomes personal. But I think we all need to be able to draw a line saying, okay, that's the personal me not getting attacked, but it may be the professional me getting called on the carpet. And so just some thoughts that I had.
Part of the joy of being able to have this kind of exchange in the morning where I'd like to believe that all of us are being as genuine and as honest as we are, is we're trying to cut through the grind of what makes church people less effective. We're trying to really explore those things that sometimes, see, a sermon doesn't flesh this out. A sermon talks to you, but doesn't allow you to respond to it. And that's kind of what we're trying to do, to help you during the course of the week to recognize that that thing that we discussed is what you're battling. And then to use, and please don't misunderstand the colloquialism here, to use the mechanism, right, which is relying on the Holy Spirit to say, Lord, you know me, you made me, you shaped me. Can you help eradicate this from me? Because right now I'm experiencing that thing that's making me less effective. That's why we have these kind of discussions. And so I think you're all right. And I think there may be some other things, but I think certainly off the top of my head, I think when Chris talks situational issues, when Gene talks about locale, and when Sarah talks about people, I think certainly those are three leading topics that challenge our ability to be thick-skinned. I think they do. And I I appreciate Brother Gene saying what he said, but this may work for you better so that you'll understand differently than what Brother Gene suggested. You guys recognize that my spouse and I have different tans. So, me moving from a place that seemed to ignore that kind of thing, which really they didn't, to a place where it's actually more overt, had to perhaps have us generate a different kind of thick-skinnedness because it was the South. And so I say that because my skin is a lot thicker than perhaps it was there, because the kind of situation that exists between my spouse and I wasn't so much of an issue overtly in the North than it is in the South. And then saying that to help you understand my thick-skinnedness. Number one, my wife almost doesn't recognize. Now, she is alert to situations that may gain attention because of the difference in how we look. And by the way, that's changed significantly over 30 years. When we first came to Virginia, the climate and the politics and culture were very different than. The only good thing that comes from the crazy climate and culture that we're in is the cross-pollination that exists much more so than existed 30 years ago. But I say that to you, so my wife is aware of it, but it doesn't bother her at all. And I'm acutely aware of it almost all the time, but I don't let it bother me either. When it would bother me, and I'm going to make a point here getting back to Paul, it would bother me if it bothered Bruce. It would make me more thin-skinned if it bothered Gene. And this gets back to the people thing, because Bruce and Gene matter to me a certain way. So their inability or the decision to view me a certain way would impact me differently than if it was somebody I don't know. If it's a looky-loo. If it's somebody driving past the accident, just looking to see who's injured there, I don't really care a whole lot. But it's going to impact me more if it's a person that is invested in me, and I believe I'm invested in them. Yes, Brother Gene.
I'm sorry, you used a foreign language there. What's that?
Looky-loo.
What is that?
Help somebody out there.
Think of a car accident or a car straight aside the road, and as you're going by, you're kind of looking at it. You know, you kind of see what's there. Yeah, there you go. I think it's what you're trying to refer to, right, Preston? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a looky-loo.
Okay, so looky-loo is synonymous with rubbernecking?
Exactly.
It's the person looking to see who's injured in the accident as they go by it.
We use it in real estate too. A looky-loo is like a tire kicker. They're just somebody who wants to stay on the periphery.
Okay. Well, we had that in New York too. They would walk past somebody who's lying on the sidewalk and go, I don't want to get involved. Back to our Good Samaritan thing. Don't want to get involved.
Or they're walking by someone on the pavement, and they have a whole lot of decisions and suggestions about the situation, and they're not involved in it.
Thank you. Sorry about that. It just
okay.
it kind of struck me as this foreign language.
Go ahead, Brother Chris.
Being drawn to a scene a car accident, a mixed marriage, a whatever that is out of our norm seems to draw people to look more. I mean, you see couples, you see cars every day, you don't think about it. But if you see a car that's upside down, you look at it because that's
Correct.
not, you look at a marriage, you look at it because that's not my norm, or my norm or whatever norm. So somehow our brain and our head goes, what is going on here? I don't comprehend.
And I can be bothered enough to the point where I have to be in control. I am not letting Jesus take the wheel. Jesus is definitely my co-pilot, even if he's in the plane, let alone then have people point fingers at my weaknesses, because right now I am perturbed, I am bothered, and something needs to be done about that. And I'm on the throne of my life perpetually, especially in circumstances that I find bothersome or annoying. And there's an odd situation, and I'll pause after I make this point. There's an let me postulate an issue and maybe pose a remedy, but it's very unrelated to Paul. Do you know? No, I'll be gentle about this. I'll include everybody. Do you know a lot of guys won't dance? And a lot of times guys won't dance. Now, that's not so much a case in North Carolina and South Carolina. North Carolina and South Carolina, guys will dance because it's kind of a tradition where they learned how to shag, or they've learned how to couple dance with their wives. But guys won't dance a lot because we think people are looking at us.
Well,
But
when
then-
you know how to dance, you look like a fool and you don't want to be looked at.
So say that again. So when you know how to dance,
When you do not know how to dance,
right?
then you look like, 4 left feet, donkey dancing on hot coals. It's just weird. And you
Love
don't want to be weird.
Love it. Who says that you look like a donkey dancing on hot coals?
Elaine told me.
Who's Elaine?
all all the people watching and laughing and pointing.
Okay. So you do.
When you find yourself on YouTube under those montage of crazy dancers and you're like, that was me. Somebody was filming me.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all the list that you mentioned, plus cringing.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, Elaine looked like she was having some sort of seizure instead of actually dancing. And she told me I dance bad, so that's where it is.
Okay.
Jerry referred to it as a full body dry heave. So that's all you just got to know. Having come up in the disco era in high school, I think for me, and you'll appreciate this, Preston, when I'd go to the school dances, the guys more with your skin tone danced a lot better than I did. They were cool. They just did it naturally. And well, what Chris said kind of describes how I felt about it. And so you just felt so exposed, and those scars still exist all these years later.
So why do kids dance?
Because kids now don't care. That's right. They don't care what people think. They could care less because they're just going to do it.
When the Lord talks about suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. That's what we're talking about, folks. Dance like there's nobody watching. Sing like there's an audience of one. See, when we become sophisticated adults and we become aware of ostracization, we become aware of the social impact. We don't engage in things because either they're the right thing or they're the fun thing to do, because right now we think that everybody's watching me. And if I have some sort of thick-skinnedness, it goes out the window, because right now all eyes are on me, or at least in my head they are. And folks, look, I will tell you that in this age of social media, that indeed may be the case. But so what?
You remind me of a young lady I dated before I knew Christine, I guess. She wouldn't do anything she couldn't do well.
Yep.
And it used to frustrate me. It's like, well, how do you get good at it if you never do it? And I don't know. I just wonder if the Lord has a similar response to me sometimes, because I'm like, well, I'm not going to do it because I don't do it well.
I love that, Bruce. Thank you for that, because that really used to be one of my mantras. That's the reason I don't play golf. Now, but I would like to believe that golf is the only thing right now nope, golf and roller skating. Those are the only two things I think on my window that I say, unless I am not going to make an absolute jerkified version of myself available for folks, I'm not going to do those because I'm not very good. I see you, Michaela. Now, it doesn't mean I haven't tried them, especially with inlines. Inlines make it easier, but I'm a 6'4" giant, and you don't want to see me flailing around looking for the help of a 5'3" young lady, because I'm going to fall on her and crush her. Likewise, I'm not going out with Jerry if Jerry's maybe not even got a handicap, and I'm not going to break 100. But there are other things, and Bruce understands one of the things that I believe is very patent. One of my current mantras is practice makes practice. And that means you got to go and do it. You got to go and do it, because you're never going to get good at it if you never start going and doing it. And so this whole Jesus encounter, this whole 2 Corinthians 12:7-10 is in your weaknesses, dealing with insults, dealing with people saying you're a jerk. You got to start practicing it to get thick-skinned in order to be able to say, in my weakness, Jesus is strong. Otherwise, you're never going to get comfortable practicing with yourself being weak if you think all eyes are on you, and that's going to bug you. So let me pause there, because we're at the end of our time. Kind of have you respond if you need to with that. I hope you thought that there's been a neat course of conversation today to help you understand Paul's at a very different place than we are in his walk with Jesus. He just is. So please be aware. By the way, thanks for joining us today, Chris. Folks, the Jesus encounter is always going to be at the forefront of our time together, because that's inquiring about your practicing. You're practicing where something embarrassing, something that you think is potentially humiliating, is something you bring to the fore now to develop a thick-skinnedness and to develop a skill and an agility with it, so that it becomes on muscle memory. And now you can dance in public because you don't, not only do you not care who's looking, you want people to care that you're dancing in public because you do it well. By the way, that's what happens with a lot of folks who dance like they don't care, is they now become, bizarrely in our age, viral sensations because they dance in a way that just brings them joy and attracts people to them.
Yeah, I dance like George McFly.
George McFly is kind of cool. George McFly is kind of cool. First movie. When you take out Biff with one punch, you know, that's pretty
That's
cool.
not dancing. That's punching.
Yes, but it all gets wrapped in the same George McFly package, so that by the time we see him later, he's pretty cool in the future.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny that he's dressed like James Bond at the enchanted thing under the sea or whatever.
Fish under the sea, yes.
Yeah, but he's got the moves maybe slightly better than Elaine by the punch bowl. But anyway, when I see him dance, I'm going, that's what I look like when I dance.
So, please don't embrace dancing as your Achilles heel. That's not necessarily what I'm looking for you to do. What I'm encouraging you to do is what Paul's doing, is as you go, the gym, the restaurant, the gas station, the convenience store, your work, is that you find a way to be able to tell the world about Jesus, person by person. You got to figure out what your own way is. You got to figure out what your own talk story is. You got to figure out what your own pacing is. But if you can't, then you're never going to be thick-skinned enough to deal with the fact that people think you're a weirdo because you're talking about Jesus. And folks, only what you do for Jesus lasts. I can't import that enough. So, any comments, any last thoughts as we Seacrest out this week? All right, so we've got one more question, and I'm going to throw it out at you so that you can think about it for next week, because it's after we have our Jesus encounter, after we talk about our scriptures and remind us about them and their impact, then this question is the one that I'm going to be asking, and I'm looking for your answer and then potentially your why. And here's the question. Are you content? Are you content? That's the question we're going to start with next week. So you got a week to think about that. Thank you, folks. Let's pray.